This episode of Heads and Tails beams in Ben Nelson, all the way from the west coast of the United States. We hear more of the vision behind higher education juggernaut Minerva and his prior experience in years of running Snapfish. Why does our system prioritise certification over real learning? How can we champion reform? Tune in for this fast-paced, eloquent take from Ben. We hope you enjoy. Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails. My name's Henry Faber. I'm one of the co-founders here at Oppidan Education, and I'm recording from Hammersmith in London, but my guest today is recording from the other side of the world. It's 4:30 for me, it's 8:30 for him. I've got a legend in our space, Ben Nelson, who's very kindly given up time to talk to me today. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Henry.
Excellent. So for those who aren't in tune with what Ben has been achieving the last few years of his life, I'm going to try and give a very haphazard bio before we kick into this conversation. So Ben's the founder and CEO of something called the Minerva Project, and the founder also of Minerva University. So we've got both a business and a university to discuss here. Ben started Minerva in 2011 with the goal of nurturing critical wisdom for the sake of the world through a systematic and evidence-based approach to learning. I'll just let that sink in. That's a big statement. Over the past decade, he's built Minerva University into one of the most selective and effective universities in the world. Ben's also developed Minerva Project, which was designed to share the Minerva approach with other like-minded institutions. And I think I'm right in saying that Minerva Project has since accelerated the creation of entirely new colleges and universities all around the world. Now, no doubt you've also heard of Snapfish, which is an aside to this conversation, but it's got to, it can't go without saying, Ben previously spent more than a decade building and running that business. If you've ever got photos from Snapfish as I have, you'll know the service well. Taking it from a startup to one of the world's largest, or I think the world's largest personal publishing service. Ben has an economics degree from UPenn, the Wharton School, and just for some totally separate trivia, I think he has previously been, or currently is still, a board member of the San Francisco Opera, which possibly speaks to some wider interests that I think tell us a little bit about.
It's been 18 years already, so it's been a while.
Amazing. Well, maybe we can start with that just very briefly. What took you into the San Francisco Opera board, and tell us about that passion in your wider life?
It's a very, very long story, but the short version is when I grew up outside of New York City, I had a distant relative who was a classical music nut, and he used to take me to symphonies, operas, things like that every couple of weeks, and I just got hooked. So grew up loving it, and it came to San Francisco, and when Snapfish was sold, oh gosh, now more than 20 years ago, I was able to, increase my contributions to the opera, and they asked me to join the board. So that's been a while.
Amazing. No doubt you have a busy schedule, so we'll get on with your questions. I would love to hear you just speak a little into the story and the dream behind Minerva. Where did that come from? And I guess, what's most important to you to tell us about that as an entity?
Well, it's kind of an interesting fork in the road. I think that higher education has been on, and education in general, because in some regards, there is this conception of education as being a platform for economic mobility, and that the education sector is really all about opening the next gate. And that's, I think, one very frankly common perspective of the sector. There's another perspective of the sector, which is increasingly rare, primarily because the sector itself has abandoned performing that duty, which is that higher education is the last line of defense for civilization. And that may sound a little bit ridiculous, but frankly, for anybody paying attention, you have to kind of understand that civilization is under attack, and it's under attack from all sides. Science is under attack from all sides. The understanding of how to process the world, how to understand it in ways that are rational, in ways that make sense, in ways that are systematic, is exceedingly rare. And what happens when you have this gate approach to education is you actually stop having educational institutions. Because what you need in order to pass the gate is not an education, it's a certification, it's a diploma, it's a degree. And so the model of, hey, I'm going to issue you a test, and I know you're going to cram for that test. I know you're going to pass that test, increasingly so because I'm going to lower the bar to pass it or to get good grades in it, because there's grade inflation, there's all sorts of other um, incentives to just issue a diploma if you pay the money. And then right after you pass that test, you're going to forget everything that was on that test. And I know that. We all know that. None of us, none of your listeners, unless they are professors of a particular subject, can pass any test they've gotten an A on when they were undergraduates. Not a single one, unless they're absolutely bizarre, right? And we are completely comfortable calling that an education, but it's not an education. It's some certification of being able to perform a stupid human trick as opposed to actually learn something. And if you believe that education plays a role, an important role, a crucial role in actually training individuals to make decisions, training individuals to know which individuals to support in making those decisions, to represent their interests, then you must believe that the sector has to be reformed. And that's a conception I kind of came to understand now more than 30 years ago, and started conceiving about what it would look like to have a higher education institution lead the way in actually educating as opposed to gating this sector. And about 15 years ago, I decided to actually do something about it, because I saw the state of the world, which 30 years ago looked very bright. And kind of my theoretical conceptions seemed, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the world will be fine. And over the ensuing time period, I realized that sadly I was not. And that indeed what we need to do is create not just an institution, but a movement to fix the education sector at large.
Amazing. What a start to our conversation. So much to unpick there, and obviously some huge challenges I'm sure everyone would agree with. I want to ask you about challenges you face at the moment. I know there'll be a lot on your plate, but I guess as concisely as you can, what's in that in tray for today or this week or this month that you're most excited about, but that's also, a great challenge?
Well, look, whenever you're leading a reform movement, the excitement is when your message resonates. The excitement is when, you know, there's a reason that we're named after a goddess, right? But I always say that, that our truth is analytical, it's not revealed. And so it's easier to just show the facts. It's easier to kind of use logic and say, oh, well, obviously once you see the alternative, you want to understand why it's a better alternative. But and that's really reassuring. It's reassuring when I talk to now, especially now that we've proven, the superiority of the model and everything else. There's almost no university president, provost, rector that I can, vice chancellor that I can talk to, that doesn't almost immediately acknowledge, wow, this is vastly better than what we're doing. This is exactly what higher education should be doing. This is exactly what education in general should be focused on. So that's very energizing, very exciting. And the more and more individuals I talk to, the more of that feedback I get. The challenge is twofold. Number one, getting the word out, making sure that a message that at least we believe, and of course this is what I'm devoting my life to, so it's a biased perspective, um, but one that I believe is so critical for the health of the world is propagated sufficiently. In fact, it's almost impossible to propagate it sufficiently given what I think of as its criticality. But the second is in a sector that is not focused on education, that is focused on certification. How do you actually motivate individuals from philosophical alignment to action, given all of the rigidities and all of the barriers that they face, both internally and externally, to reform? There is a reason that education has become easier over the decades. There's a reason that less is demanded of students. There's a reason that higher grades are given to students for vastly less knowledge, vastly less work. To not only reverse that trend, but do so in a radically different and more demanding approach is challenging. And so you have, or I at least face that dichotomy every day of having conversations, getting resonance, getting excitement, and then facing the reality of institutional transformation, which is, let's just say, not the easiest mission to tackle.
We hear a lot here in the UK of this kind of political moment and existential threat to universities in the States. Who's got a crystal ball? No one. But if you had a crystal ball, what do you predict for the landscape of higher education? In the States specifically, I suppose, is most of interest, but more broadly globally. Like, where do you see things really headed the next few months or year down the line?
Look, overwhelmingly, higher education is a strange sector. It's a sector that overwhelmingly relies on public support, call it government support, philanthropic support, subsidies, etc., and is effectively providing a market good, right? A service that you can actually build a non-subsidized offering to provide, right? And there has been that clash forever. The root cause is that the institutions themselves have lost the public faith. Because, as I said, and I'm sure, again, any of your listeners who said, oh, yeah, higher education is cram, pass, forget, everybody was nodding. So, of course it is. Right? I didn't learn anything in college. I didn't learn anything in university. I don't do anything day to day. Today, I didn't make a decision today, this week, this month, this year that I learned how to make as an undergraduate. I didn't deploy the things that I learned in my class, certainly not the bulk of them. Maybe there's one lesson, maybe I actually remember some statistical tool that I use every once in a while. Like maybe I learned how to create good sentence structure in high school, and I use that every once in a while, etc. But overwhelmingly, we know the sector is massively inefficient, and so when the government comes and says, "Hey, you know what? I'm just going to cut your funding by several $100 million, you rich institutions that have billions of dollars squirreled away in the bank," guess what? There's no public uproar. And the public broadly determines what occurs to our institutions. Universities have one golden goose, and that is the license raj, right? It is illegal in most countries to pursue the highest paying professions without those certifications. In most countries, have created oligopolies in order to certify people to be able to pursue those jobs. But when the public no longer believes in the institution's ability to educate, to add value, how long will it take before the public starts to question why? If I can prove on a cram pass forget test at 18 that I can be a lawyer, a barrister, or anything else, why would I need to spend years of my money or the government's money or philanthropist's money in order to be able to get to the point where I can prove that? What's the value add? Why is society spending $2.2 trillion in a giant kabuki theater?
That's a good quote. I'm going to get you for that one. A giant kabuki theater. That's certainly not a phrase I've heard on this podcast before, but I enjoy it. I'm going to dig into that one later. That's great. Ben, you're very eloquent on this, and I think it's wise stuff. We have an audience mostly of educators, whether they're teachers or otherwise, they're interested in education, clearly. Perhaps a good way to frame this episode and kind of begin to draw it to some kind of conclusion is, what's your one piece of advice you'd really stand behind for people in this sector? Like, is there something that holds true for everyone who's navigating a path through a career in education that you feel is your biggest and best piece of advice?
Look, for the individual, historically, the perspective was think about your domain. Be the best teacher you can be. Change lives, reach out, do things individually. And I think that that's obviously true. You've got to do what you can to actually educate, to actually make sure that students are absorbing their lessons, that they see the connections that they need to make in order to be able to use what it is that they learn, etc. But sadly, that's no longer useful, sufficiently useful. The reality is that in order to teach anybody anything, you need to have spaced, deliberate practice. You have to have that student marinate in applying what it is that they've learned. And you've got to do that across multiple contexts. And an individual educator simply doesn't have enough cycles with the student to fully affect how it is that they absorb and understand and see the world. Maybe they're a little subject, but not their broad thinking. And for that, you must have institutional reform. And that requires loud, active advocacy for change, to abandon the status quo and to look at evidence-based solutions and adopt them. There is this concept of in education that, well, we don't want to experiment. These are, kids' lives. These are, young adults' lives, and we don't want to take the risk. We are basically putting leeches on them to drain bad humors. We're performing witchcraft. It simply does not work. Just stopping some of the things that we do would already make benefit rather than replacing them with anything. And so the criticality of institutional reform is one that should urge change, should urge abandonment of the current status quo, and the individual really needs to embrace their role in advocating for the reform of the whole.
Amazing. A call to arms then. That's what I'm hearing from that. That's excellent. And to finish, I guess just to kind of close this wonderfully rich and varied conversation we've had. Thank you, Ben. What next for you? I mean, you mentioned that in tray earlier, but like where's the next year taking you, and what's on that list that you're like, I'm most excited about that?
Well, outside of propagating and creating more and more Minerva programs at higher education institutions all over the world, of which now we've got more than a couple of dozen in 8 different countries, um, we actually just last year created a spin out of a new high school curriculum company. And to bring the Minerva philosophy of education into a curriculum that we hope will over time obliterate the teach to the centrally administered test, subject matter test, and instead replace it with a holistic, formative feedback oriented education that actually tracks how well somebody can apply what it is that they've learned as opposed to recall it. And so that's given me even more energy and opening up the aperture of the education reform movement.
Super exciting, and any independent environment with enough of that kind of ability to change and to adapt, we could use a little bit more of that here in the UK. So I hope you reach our shores very soon if you haven't already. Ben, thank you. You're a busy man with a lot going on and a big reform agenda to get going with, so I better leave you to it. But I'm very grateful for you sharing all your time and wisdom with us. And I know that this episode will be a really wise source of advice and support to a lot of people grappling for how to make change in a world that seems sometimes impossible to change. So thank you, and we wish you well.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate it.